Welcome everyone this morning. I'm happy to be back with you again. I see your coats on. I don't see anybody's breath, so I guess we're pretty good. A couple of things just before we get started on today's material. A couple of things that I thought maybe we should bring up. I should have done this last time. As we dealt with the first vision and the Smith family religious issues, that was pages 9 to 19 in Saints, where it covered that particular material. As we get into it today a little bit, I'll show you the page numbers for today's too, as we're moving forward. Secondly, I wanted to show you this last time, and then we just never got around to it. Particularly with people who are struggling with the first vision over inconsistencies in the story, and this has become a stumbling block for them. I thought this would be worth our attention for a moment. In the Gospels, and we'll look particularly at Mark and John today a little bit, there is a moment where we come upon the Passover and what's called the Day of Preparation, where the lambs are killed and slaughtered in preparation for the Passover feast that evening. As Mark tells the story, okay, and this is in Mark 14, verses 12 to 15, we won't read this whole thing. I'll just underline the salient part for you, which is the first verse. Oops, there's John. Okay, I'll just underline the salient parts for you. This is Mark. The first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, "Where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover?" So there's the day of preparation in the Gospel of Mark. In John, we'll start in verse 13. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover about the 6th hour, and he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. And they cried out, Away with him, away with him, crucify him. So what's the problem here? In the Gospel of Mark, on the day of preparation, when the lambs were killed, where is Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, getting ready to prepare for the Last Supper. So Jesus sends them out. You can see in verse 13, tells them to go meet a man. He'll give them a room, and they make things all ready for the Passover feast. In John, where is Jesus on the day of preparation? Yes, he's been to Gethsemane. He's been betrayed. He's been before the council of the Sanhedrin. He's been taken to Pilate, and he is now being taken out and crucified. So, what here? Okay, now, sometimes I get a little bit concerned, if you will, about people who get so upset about little tiny things, where they're so quick to judge Joseph over discrepancies that they may see here or there, say, as we were talking last week in the first vision accounts. They look at the New Testament. I wonder, and I would ask the question, are we prepared to reject the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of John, or in fact, the entire Gospel accounts completely because of the inconsistencies that we find? If you look at the resurrection, for instance, there's not one gospel that really agrees. Who was at the tomb that morning? Who did they meet? What was said? What did they do? Every gospel is different. And one of the interesting comments, preparation. One of the interesting comments is from Origen of Alexandria, who someone called the greatest genius the early church ever produced. He read over the gospel accounts, and his comment was this: John, as the author of the gospel, is not always historically correct, but he is always theologically correct. Okay, so in this particular case, why would John be theologically correct? Okay, well, it's the Passover season. The lambs are being slain. Who is the lamb? Okay, and to connect that great imagery of the Passover that they had been celebrating for generations with the moment when not a lamb, but the lamb is being slaughtered and fulfilling the old covenant and getting ready for the new covenant, John places the killing of the lamb immediately on the day of preparation, where the lambs all over Israel are being slaughtered, to bring into union the life of Jesus and, of course, the meaning of their law that they have been living for so long. John does this on a number of occasions. Okay, well, and maybe John's right. Who's to say John's not right and Mark has got it wrong here? Okay, but John does the very same thing with the cleansing of the temple. If you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are the synoptics, the cleansing of the temple is after Jesus enters into Jerusalem in the triumphal entry. In John, anyone know where the cleansing of the temple story is? Right after the wedding feast in Cana, when the water has been changed to the wine, John places the story there. Now, one of the problems we have is that when you do what we do in gospel doctrine, and you try to teach the story of the life of Jesus as if it's one story, well, that story doesn't really exist. There's a story in Matthew, there's a story in Mark, there's a story in Luke, there's a story in John. Each of them are different, each of them have a different point of view. Joseph Smith was very wise when he changed in the Joseph Smith translation the title, not the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, but what? The testimony of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And when you understand that this is John's testimony and what he's doing, then his organization of his material begins to make a lot more sense. Okay, now like I said, the problem we have in gospel doctrine is, what do we do with this? So we create a story where there are now 2 cleansings of the temple. Well, that doesn't work. That's like I said, a story that really doesn't exist. And I know on a university level, when I taught New Testament, I taught the life of Jesus in seminary to younger people. When I got to the university, my preferred way of instruction was the Gospels in chronological order as they build on one another. Mark first, then Matthew, then Luke, then John, where we had an opportunity to hear each of the individual testimonies of those authors, and then be able to highlight some of the differences that exist between the Gospels and talk about why that is. And so, again, coming back to the first vision, I don't think any of us are ready to set aside the Gospels because of all of these inconsistencies in the story historically. And we should feel the very same way about Joseph and the first vision accounts and those things in the early history of the church that we find where we suppose there are, problems, where in reality these testimonies ring true from beginning to end. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of deal with that a little bit, throw that out. I wanted to end with that slide last time. We just ran out of time. All right, today. You love the crumpled paper so much. There's the origami. I titled our discussion today this: Of Seers and Stones, Reflections on the Historical and Theological Implications of the Gift of Seership. All right, hold on, here we go. And I should mention that this is going to cover in your Book of Saints, pages 21 to 64. And it's interesting to put the story together through there because it'll talk a little bit about it, then there's some, in-between material, then it'll do it again, then some in-between material. So you almost have to cross-reference the story through those pages of page 21 to 64. But that's where we are. All right. There is, brothers and sisters, a common flow of church history as we usually tell the story from the first vision of the prophet Joseph Smith to the organization of the church. Now, we don't need to have a discussion about, how that is. We can just put it up here because I think we all understand this. In 1820, we have the first vision. 1823, we have the visitation of Moroni and Joseph. In between their visits to the hill Cumorah, until ultimately Joseph takes the plates out of the hill in 1827. 1829, we have the Book of Mormon translated and published. 1829 and 30, we have the restoration of the priesthood. And then in 1830, we have the organization of the Church of Jesus Christ. So as we tell the story, this is our usual construction. My question this morning is, what's missing here? Now, I'm not talking about little tiny details. I'm talking about something big. What's missing in this flow and in this story and in this chronology? Well, we need to add a date here. Right between 1820 and 1823, Joseph Smith, the young boy, 15 years old now, discovers and obtains his Seer stone. How did he find the Seer stone? Here's the historical record. This is Willard Chase. The Chase family is very prominent in Palmyra. Willard was a minister, ran the farm. Mason, his brother, was a minister in town. Willard ran the farm. They have a sister, Sally Chase, who's rather prominent in Palmyra. He records, in the year 1822, I was engaged in digging a well. I employed Alvin and Joseph Smith to assist me. After digging about 20 feet below the surface of the earth, we discovered a singularly appearing stone, which excited my curiosity. I brought it to the top of the well, and as we were examining it, Joseph put it into his hat, and then his face into the top of his hat. The next morning, he came to me and wished to obtain the stone, alleging that he could see in it. But I told him I did not wish to part with it on account of its being a curiosity, but that I would lend it to him for a season. Well, he does give it to Joseph, and of course, that was a permanent lending. He never got that back, and in fact, this is going to become one of the major problems with Joseph and some of the people in the Palmyra area, because when Joseph finds the plates of gold, Willard Chase and the whole Chase family believe they have some kind of claim on that, given that Joseph was using this stone that he had found on the Chase property, and that originally it was intended he only have it temporarily. And so that becomes the source of many of the issues that begin to happen in early Palmyra. Okay, well, this stone, it's described as about the size of a chicken egg, chocolate brown in color, with veins of quartzite running through it. When I used to teach this, I would hold this up. Okay, and I would say, this seems similar. However, we don't know if it's the size of a chicken egg larger, or is it the size of a chicken egg smaller? We really don't know, but we do now, don't we? Okay, because in August of 2015, okay, the church published for the very first time the actual Seer stone that had been in the vault of the First Presidency ever since Brigham came west with the Saints. Okay, and it appears it's the chicken eggs larger. In fact, I always thought that was pretty good. Well, immediately when this was published, there was a firestorm. Comments from outside the church. Okay, this article first appeared in the Salt Lake Tribune. There were 2,565 comments the first day. Okay, some of them read this: I would rather sign on as a J-dub. Who'd continue to be an LDS after researching Mr. Smith's antics? Stone of inspiration, bogus papyri. The Book of Mormon is positively laughable in many areas. Didn't like the Bible, so he cooked up a new faith like so many others. Research before you join, folks. Or here's a good one. LDS claims are so outlandish that they don't just require faith, but require one to literally believe something that one knows not to be true. All right? Or the world knows that the Mormon Church is just one big convoluted fraud. The exception being the deluded, brainwashed masses of a very backward and increasingly retarded area of the American Midwest. Who are mischievously wallowing in lies and deniability. What a load of malarkey. There is no such thing as a seer stone. There are only con artists who make the claim of having them and gullible patsies who believe them. What a crock. Well, this is the stuff you're running or your children are running across on the internet. How about some Latter-day Saint comments? These were interesting. The problem with the brown striated stone is that it crosses a boundary we had held onto between religion and superstition. Now, these are Latter-day Saints. Mormons need to wrestle with the idea more. I don't think we can understand it. Okay? It's not the stone or the latest in the church's open discourses of historical facts that are being mocked. It is how after years of denial, false testimonies, and threatening excommunications or disfellowship for discussing such items or doctrines, now we find out that they are actually true. This is an interesting one here. Before the last year or so, almost no one else ever heard of a seer stone. There are no artistic depictions of it, no mention of it in any materials produced by the church educational system, no mention in the standard works, no mention in most of the books on LDS shelves. You had to go outside church publication to find out about it, so don't act like this information was widely known. Well, remember last week when I told you if you ever want to keep anything from the saints, just hide it in the ensign? Look, okay? The Friend, 1974. The stone is mentioned to try to help young people understand. Another article in The Friend in 2004 called Coming Forth of the Book of Mormon. In the Ensign, okay, 1977, by the gift and power of God, also mentions the hat. 1987, the Alvin Smith story. 1993, a treasured testament. You know what that is? That's President Nelson going to the MTC and speaking to the mission presidents and trying to get them to help the young missionaries better understand how to teach the history of the church. 1994, highlights in the prophet's life. 1997, this was a big one. Okay? By the gift and power of God, Elder Maxwell, January, that issue. You need to get a hold of this. Because he not only mentions the seer stone, he mentions the hat. He talks about the 12 eyewitness accounts we have of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon and its translation. And he deals with the absence of a curtain between Joseph and Oliver, Joseph and Oliver. He deals with it openly. Now look, I read that statement, okay? You had to go outside church publications to find it, so don't act like it was widely known. Sometimes it's our own ignorance, brothers and sisters, that's causing the problem. And that we need to pay attention here a little bit and not be so quick to think we're on top of this information as it comes forth. All right, now before we do, any comments or questions or rebukes for the instructor at this point?
What was Willard's last name?
Chase. Yeah, we'll come back to that. C-H-A-S-E. All right? You okay back there?
Was it stated in the literature about how Joseph came to find out it was a seer stone?
Let's move on. I think we'll answer that as we're moving forward. Okay.
Yeah, Bruce, can you tell us what people are saying, what they're asking you?
I think those. Oh, you mean in the questions now? This question would say it again.
How did he come to find out it was a
How did he come to find out it was a seer stone? Okay, and so we'll touch on that here in just a sec. All right. Oh, and I should put this one up here too. This is an important article you ought to all have in your files. This is Joseph the Seer in the Ensign of October 2015, which was the Ensign article published on the coattails of the release of the pictures of the stone from the First Presidency Vault, and that's an important one. Okay, well, you know, we talk about mocking. You go on the internet, you find any number of things. You know, Joseph in his hat, South Park and the two stones going into the hat. You see those things all over. People get a little nervous about this kind of stuff. Or even with our own literature, you know, sometimes people wonder. Now, this is an interview that was given by Martin Harris to Tiffany's Monthly in 1859, where he tells a story of Joseph and the stone. I thought you might be interested in this. Joseph had a stone that was dug from the well of Mason Chase, 24 feet from the surface. In this stone, he could see many things to my certain knowledge. It was by means of this stone he first discovered the plates. Now, remember that. One of the things we're going to do today is we're going to try to figure out what role this stone played in the early history of the church. And you need to be making at least a mental list of these things. This is one of them. We'll come back to this in a minute. We'll kind of try to do them in order. In the first place, he told me of this stone and proposed to bind it on his eyes and run a race with me in the woods. Now, we hear that, or we have some kind of visual image of that. Hey, Joseph, take that stone, bind it on your eyes, ready, set, go. And Joseph jumps over every piece of deadfall, dodges every tree, and beats Martin in the race. A few days after this, I was at the house of his father in Manchester, 2 miles south of Palmyra village, and was picking my teeth with a pin while sitting on the bars. Now, those of you who've been to Palmyra, they're in the barn. And if you remember, you walk down that middle aisle, and to the sides in the barn are the sunken areas where the animals were. They're sitting up on the railing of the pit after working out there, and Martin's picking his teeth with a pin. They used to have a metal toothpick that they kept in a little pouch in their pocket. They just finished lunch, so he's cleaning his teeth with it. Okay. The pin caught in my teeth and dropped from my fingers into the shavings and straw. Now, those of you who have been there, you'll know if you stand in that middle thing and you look down, they've actually taken this account and they've tried to make this as realistically as possible in the barn. And they've actually created a platform of shavings and straw down there so that as you stand there, you can visualize this very thing. I jumped from the bars and looked for it. Joseph and Northrop's suite also did the same. We could not find it. I then took Joseph on surprise and said to him, I said, take your stone. I had never seen it and did not know that he had it with him. He had it in his pocket. He took it, placed it in his hat, the old white hat, placed his face in his hat. I watched him closely to see that he did not look one side. He reached out his hand beyond me on the right and moved the little stick. And there I saw the pin, which he picked up and gave to me. I know he did not look out of that hat until after he had picked up the pin. Joseph had had this stone for some time. So, rhetorically I ask, what do you think of that?
Where was this in Martin Harris's testimony? Is this, because we know he becomes apostate,
Where? Oh, he's in Utah, up in Smithfield.
Is he still faithful at this point
Yes.
when he gives this interview?
Absolutely. He's here in Utah, living up in Smithfield at the time. Okay? Well, brothers and sisters, be careful about how you think about these things. Be slow to jump to conclusions. Because when you start to be patient and you start to take this apart a little bit, we begin to see some quite amazing things. All right. Alma chapter 37, verse 23. This is 73 years before Christ. And the Lord said, I will prepare unto my servant Gezelem a stone, which shall shine forth in darkness unto light, that I may discover unto my people who serve me, that I may discover unto them their works, the works of their brethren, yea, their secret works, their works of darkness, and their wickedness and abominations. Well, in the original Book of Mormon, there was no punctuation. All the punctuation was added by the printer. So it's hard to know what this Gezelem thing is, whether it's the servant or whether it's the stone. Okay, does it read, I will prepare unto my servant Gezelem a stone? Or does it read, I will prepare unto my servant Gezelem a stone? Which is the way they punctuated it. Well, that appears to be it, even though it would not be unusual for stones to have names. Because the two most famous, of course, are what? Urim and Thummim, lights and perfection. Well, this is 73 years before Christ. Who is this servant Gezelem we're talking about here? Well, W.W. Phelps knew a lot of stuff. He's the one that said, creation has been going on in this eternity for 2,500 millions of years. He's the one that wrote the hymn, If You Could Hide a Kolob. Very intimate friend with the prophet Joseph, and in fact so intimate that he was asked to preach Joseph's funeral sermon. And in Joseph's funeral sermon, he made a very interesting comment. Like the sun in his meridian splendor, Joseph Smith shone a full man at home, among his friends, in the fields, on the bench, or before the world, was a pattern parent, a worthy friend, a model general, a righteous judge, and the wisest man of the age. Sustained by truth, God was his right-hand man. I would think you'd maybe be the other way. Surely as one of the holy ones commissioned by his father among the royal 70, when the high council of heaven set them apart to come down and multiply and replenish the earth, he, Joseph, was the last, and who knows but the greatest, for he declared, we knew not who he was. So I may say, as the last is to be first and the first last in the eternal rotation, that Joseph Smith, who was Gezelem in the spirit world, was and is and will be in the endless progress of eternity. Now we even find out what Gezelem means, the Prince of Light. All right? So look, 73 years before the birth of Christ, this stone is known. This stone is prepared. This stone is placed in a place where Joseph is going to be able to find it. Because it's part of the plan and part of the organization that Heavenly Father has for this earth. Now, we should understand this a little bit. Most of us are old enough to know that prior to the 1980 addition to the scriptures, all of those little code names were in there. Remember those? Okay. In those, Joseph is consistently and regularly referred to as who? Gezelem. Okay. I guess I understand why they took those code words out. They said it was for readability. But when we do that, we lose some very important things sometimes. I was always glad I grew up with those things, so I was even aware of them, rather than, only having post-1980 scriptures and not having any contact with any of this at all. Well, here are some essential quotations as we're dealing with some things here. Brigham Young. The seer stone, which Joseph Smith first obtained, he got in an iron kettle 15 feet under the ground. He saw it, he went right to the spot and dug and found it. So this isn't just a rock lying willy-nilly in the soil. Okay, this is something that has been specially placed. It's in an iron kettle, not only specially placed, but set apart from any other stone that might be around it. Okay, Brigham says he saw it. Wilford Woodruff said, Joseph Smith found his seer stone by revelation. Okay, by revelation. Now, what that was all about, not really sure, but the connection that runs back to Alma chapter 37 and the discovery of this stone, this is something very important that we need to keep in mind. And as I said before, be careful not to jump to conclusions too quickly. Be patient. Be willing to study it out before you decide how you're going to feel one way or the other. And as we're going to see, if you choose to reject some of these things, you may be cutting yourself off from some of the greatest blessings that have been promised to you, both here and in the eternities. Well, here's Orson Pratt, speaking of the stone. It was not something that existed on the earth in a natural state. It was something made by the Lord. Now, we know how this works because we have an account. How does the Lord make seer stones? How does he do it? Where do you go to find that? Book of Ether, Book of Mormon, right? How were stones changed in their essential character to become Seeric implements? He touched them. Now, that's one possible way that it could have happened. There's another possibility that we'll come to later. Okay, Orson Pratt again. The Lord is a good mechanic. He understands how to make things. He made the heavens and the earth. He made the worlds, and that we see roll, as it were, upon their wings in the midst of space. He understands how to do such things. Great quote. Here's another one from Brother Pratt. Here then, speaking of the stone, is the very first gift. Now, I want you to remember this, because this is going to be important in just a minute. Here then, the very first gift that the Lord set in his church is a peculiar gift, so far as the religions of the world are concerned, not so peculiar so far as the Church of Christ is concerned, but so far as the religious world in the four quarters of the earth is concerned. We have something which they have not got, and something that is in accordance with the Bible. Now, you remember some of those comments that we read earlier. What are those people saying? They don't get it. They don't understand. They don't have it. They said it's not in the scriptures. Be careful about that. All right? This then is the very first gift the Lord set in his church. Here's another important quote. This is Joseph's mother. That stone of which I spoke, which Joseph termed a key, was indeed nothing more nor less than a Urim and Thummim. Now, one of the problems that we have in early church history is in vocabulary. Because for those folks in the early church, seer stone and Urim and Thummim were absolutely synonymous. And they cross-pollinated those words so much that you hardly have an easy time understanding which they're talking about. Are they talking about the Urim and Thummim? Are they talking about the seer stone? It's hard to know sometimes. Okay? But that's okay, because they cross-pollinated those things by scriptural precedent. And we'll look at that in a minute. Okay? That stone of which I spoke, which Joseph turned to key, was indeed nothing more nor less than a Urim and Thummim. And it was by this, oh, here we go again, that the angel showed him many things which he saw in vision. Which angel are we talking about there? Moroni. Now, very interesting and fascinating that 1 year before Moroni's visit, Joseph finds the seer stone. In fact, he's going to have an entire year to experiment, okay, to practice, to wonder what this is. The next year, when Moroni comes, the entire meaning of that stone is going to change. Lucy says it was by this means that the angel showed him many things which he saw in vision. Well, we know what the interview with an angel is like. All you have to do is read 1 Nephi 11. Okay? Nephi to the angel. Angel to Nephi. What do you want to know? Well, I would like to know what the meaning of the tree my father saw is. And the angel says what? Look. Go through chapter 11 and circle the number of times the word look is used as the angel and Joseph communicate. Lucy says that the instrument of communication in that setting was what? The stone. By which he could also, he could ascertain at any time the approach of danger either to himself or the record, and on account of which he always kept the stone about his person. Now, back in the olden days, I used to use this. Okay? We don't have to use this anymore because now we have the actual picture, okay, of not only the stone, but the bag that Joseph wore around his neck, under his clothing, that acted as some kind of a, early warning system so that he would know the plates were in danger. Look, we have that story. Joseph has the plates buried out under the floor of the cooper shop. He's in the frame home asleep. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, he awakens and knows that the plates are in danger. He goes out to the cooper shop, he digs up the floor, he brings them in, puts them in the hearth, and the next morning they go out, and the entire cooper's shop has been trashed, people in there looking for the plates. How did he know they were in danger? How did he know that they needed to be moved? Lucy says it was what? The stone that he always kept about his person. Well, this is a very sacred thing. As we'll see, not only something that has been touched, perhaps, by the finger of God, but maybe even more than that, as we'll see towards the end. It's a very private and sacred thing. I know of several times it has been out on display. Wilford Woodruff, at the dedication of the Manti Temple, had the stone on the altar in front of the veil during the entire time of the dedication services. At the founding of the University of Deseret, dates 1856, Brigham brought the stone. The Board of Regents gathered around the table. He held it up, he explained it, he passed it around to all of the people. Excuse me, my phone's ringing. Hearing devices are amazing things. He passed it around the Board of Regents, each handled it, told their memories and their stories of this stuff. The last I know that it had been seen was at the death of Joseph Fielding Smith. When Joseph Fielding Smith died, 3 men went to clean out his personal effects from the president's office. Douglas Smith, of the former Bonneville Second Ward. Why? Oldest son. Bruce R. McConkie. Why? Son-in-law. All right. Harold B. Lee. Why? Next president. So they went down to the office. Now, I have this story from Doug. where we should have been out home teaching. We were sitting in the car talking. So Doug told me this story. So they took the stone out that was in the bag. They undid it. They looked at it. They passed it around. That's the last that I know that it was out. So it's not been totally secret, but it's a very private kind of thing. I think what's prompted the church to come forth now is because people are making such a big deal out of it. Okay. And so we live in a wonderful time of historical openness where these things have not been available to people that have come before us. So anyway, so Joseph kept this on him at all times.
Are there others in our time who have actually used it?
Use this seer stone? Well, I asked Doug, did you look in it? And he just smiled at me and said, there was nothing to be seen. So I don't know what that means. Anyway, let me show you a couple of other quotations here. We don't want to run this too long. These are important as you add to your list here. Martin Harris. Joseph had before described the manner of his finding the plates. He found them by looking in the stone found in the well of Mason Chase. The family likewise told me the same thing. Now, you remember what Joseph says in his history. The official history, this is verse 50 in Joseph Smith History 1. Owing to the distinctiveness of the vision which I had concerning it, I knew the place where the plates were hidden. On another occasion, he said, I went directly to the spot, quote, I having previously seen them in the place of their deposit. Willard Chase. Some years ago, a spirit had appeared to Joseph, his son, in a vision and informed him that in a certain place there was a record on plates of gold and that he was the person that must obtain them. He, Joseph Smith, then observed that if it had not been for the stone, he would not have obtained the book. Henry Harris, Martin's brother, he, Joseph Smith, said he had a revelation from God that told him they were hid in a certain hill, and he looked in his stone and saw them in the place of their deposit. Very consistent with Lucy's comment of Joseph and the use of the stone. Okay? I think that's important. Well, let's move away from history for a minute and move into some theology. This is Mosiah chapter 8, verses 12 to 17. This is, without question, the single best definition of what a seer is that we have. You'll remember the setting. We won't read all of this, but they've been out searching to see if they could find the city of the Nephites that left, Limhi and his people, and they come across this valley of bones, and in this valley of bones they find the Jaredite record, and they bring it back to Limhi and his people. Nobody can read it because it's in the language prior to the Tower of Babel. Nobody knows it. And so now Ammon, who's up in the city of Zarahemla, they're looking for the people back in the city of Nephi. So he is with an exploring party that goes back, and they come together. And Limhi says to Ammon, do you know anybody who can read these ancient records? Because we found them and nobody can read them. And Ammon's comment is to him in verse 13, I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records, for he has wherewith he can look. Now, here is the definition of a seer. Number one, there are tools involved in being a seer. Okay? Not in being a prophet, but in being a seer. You have to have the instruments, the seeric tools in which you can look. These tools are a gift from God. All right? No one can use them, and this goes, to one of the questions we had. No one can use them or look in them except they be commanded. Whosoever is commanded and has the tools, the same is called a seer. Now, you ought to have this marked in your scriptures for sure. Okay?
We're fixing into Mosiah 8.
Mosiah 8, 12 to 17. Okay? A seer is greater than a prophet. Well, you can figure that out just by looking at the Hebrew words. Okay? The word for prophet is nabi. The word for seer is ro'eh. Okay? Ro'eh for seer means to look, to uncover, to make known, to see, to reveal. The word for prophet is teach, protect, guard. And so you can see how one could be greater than the other, but there would be a logical progression from one to another. Okay? A seer is a revelator and a prophet also. A gift which is greater can no man have. Things shall be made known by them, and I assume that means both the seers and the tools, which otherwise could not be known. Now, what a great definition for what a seer is. We need to add one more thing to that. Okay? In 1 Samuel chapter 9, and you'll want to make note of this and put a little reference in your scriptures about this. Saul is out looking for the lost animals. He can't find them anywhere. He's looking and looking and looking. So he decides to do what? Well, I'm going to go to Samuel, who is the prophet, and I'm going to ask him. Maybe he can help me find those tools. Now, this is a very, very interesting verse, because this story is being told, and then all of a sudden in verse 9, you have this parenthetical statement where the writer of 1 Samuel speaks to you to teach you and instruct you. Before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, "Come and let us go to the seer. For he that is now called a prophet was before time called a seer." Now start to put some things into context. Orson Pratt said that this gift was what? The first gift in the church. Ammon tells us that a seer is greater than a prophet. The definitions of the Hebrew words explain and help us understand why that may not be, and that there is a pattern of prophet making that goes clear back into the days of the Old Testament, where seers become prophets, and the work begins. And of course, you always have to reveal and unveil and uncover before you can guard and teach and protect. Does that make any sense? All right. Well, here's what we have in the history of the church. If you have your scriptures, open them up to Doctrine and Covenants, section 21. This is the first time that we have the job description of Joseph Smith. Okay. This is April 6th, 1830, on the time that the church is organized. In verse 1, the Lord says, "Behold, there shall be a record kept among you, and in it thou," speaking to Joseph, "shalt be called," number one, what? A seer, a translator, then a prophet. Now notice how this all lines up. And notice how the sequence follows a consistent pattern. And notice that in this setting for Joseph Smith, it is exactly in the same pattern of prophet making that goes back to the days of the Old Testament times. Now I'm telling you, Brother Pratt said this is the first gift. If this wasn't here, if we couldn't see this in Joseph's life, something would be wrong. Something would be missing. We could be suspicious. But with this being here, everything lines up, everything is consistent, everything ties together and connects Joseph Smith to the ancient prophets that have walked this earth from the very beginning. That's important to know. Okay? And Joseph is consistently called seer and then prophet as you go through. When do we change from prophet, seer, or from seer prophet to prophet seer? Very interesting, and I think there's a reason for this. We first find it in section 127, verse 12 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Okay? This is 1842, and it's after the temple has been built and the endowment has been introduced, and women and men have been instructed about how to stand before the veil and call upon the Lord and part the veils of heaven. When that knowledge has become consistent among the brothers and sisters of the church, we move from seer prophet to prophet seer, where prophet, the guarding, the protecting, the teaching, becomes the preeminent aspect of those leaders and brothers who have been called. I think that's important to know. Okay? Well, here's another one we ought to be aware of. This is 2 Nephi chapter 3. You all know this. Lehi is on his deathbed. He calls his children to him. His last-born son is named Joseph, so he's the last one to come. He lays his hands upon Joseph's head, and he restores for us from the brass plates prophecies missing from our own scriptures that were given by Joseph of old, who was sold into Egypt. Now, this is lengthy, but I think we should read it. For Joseph truly testified, Lehi says, saying, a seer shall the Lord my God raise up, who shall be a choice seer unto the fruit of my loins. He shall do a work for the fruit of thy loins, his brethren, which shall be of great worth unto them, to bringing of them to the knowledge of the covenants which I have made with my fathers. And he shall be great like unto Moses, and a seer will I raise up out of the fruit of thy loins, and unto him will I give power to bring forth my word unto the seed of thy loins. And not to the bringing forth of my word only, saith the Lord, but to the convincing them of my word. Behold, that seer will the Lord bless, that they that seek to destroy him shall be confounded. For this promise which I have obtained of the Lord, of the fruit of the loins, shall be fulfilled, and his name shall be called after me, and it shall be after the name of his father, and he shall be like unto me. For the thing which the Lord shall bring forth by his hand, by the power of the Lord shall bring my people into salvation. Now, there's a familiar set of scriptures. We read this, he shall be like unto me, and immediately we think he's talking about what here? His name shall be called after me, and it shall be the name of his father, and he shall be like unto me. We think that's what he's talking about here. But I want you to look at this. Okay? We're not talking about a name here. We're talking about something else. I told you Joseph is in the pattern of prophet making from the beginning. Here's the connection between Joseph and Joseph. So let me pose a question here. If Joseph of old is like Joseph of new, and they are like each other, seers, and the first requirement of being a seer is that you have to have what? The tools. So what was Joseph of old's tool? Now we know he was a great interpreter of dreams. How did he do this? How did he function as a seer? It was so well known. Okay? Open up your scriptures to Genesis chapter 41, if you would. These are pretty important things to not slide over as you're reading. This is after Joseph has interpreted the dreams of the 7 fat cows and the seven thin cows. Verse 39, okay, Pharaoh now comes to Joseph and says this. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, and again I say, showed him how, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he said unto him, and he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the manner of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zopanath Paneah. What in the world does that mean? And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zopanath Paneah. Here's the translation. He who reveals that which is hidden. It should read and could read, and the Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zopanath Paneah. Instead of that, it probably should read, and Pharaoh called Joseph's name Joseph the Seer. He who reveals that which is hidden. Perfectly, totally consistent with Ammon's description of what a seer is in Mosiah chapter 8. But the question's still out there. So, how did he do this? What was the tool? Take your scriptures and go over to chapter 44 of Genesis. Very interesting. Now, remember, his brothers have come down. He has not revealed himself to his brothers. They're going to go back and get their father and bring him, but he wants to keep Benjamin behind. They don't want to do this. They can't go to their father with this. They've already lost one of his children. How can they do it again? So they refuse to do it. So Joseph conspires to keep Benjamin behind. Remember how he did it? But read this story carefully. Verse 1. And he, Joseph, commanded the steward of his house, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. Okay, this is Genesis 44, 1-15. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money, and he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses. Always love that verse. And when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Is not this it? What are we talking about here? The silver cup. Is not this it, in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth? How have we missed that? What was Joseph of old's tool? It'll be referenced again in verse 15 as he's talking to the brothers, and he says, Wot ye not that such a man as I, as they come back, can certainly divine? How does this work? I don't know. Does he hold up the cup empty and look into the bottom? Does he fill it with water? And somehow in the movement of the water, the visions reveal themselves? I have no idea. Or does he have a stone that he puts inside like a hat? Yeah, we don't know. Okay, all we have is the statement that it is the cup in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divines. Again, consistent stories. testimonies, patterns of profit making, connections. We need to see this as we read the scriptures and then look at the history of the church. I just, kind of shake my head sometimes at people when you show them something, or Moses and his staff, and they go, oh yeah, Joseph of old, great prophet. Joseph Smith had a stone. I don't know if I can deal with that. You see the problem? Well, here's something very interesting. This is Mircea Eliade's book, The Forge and the Crucible. It is a study of the structures and origins of alchemy. Now, we hear that, we think, a bunch of guys sitting around trying to take iron and turn it into gold. That's not what alchemy was. Mircea Eliade is probably the foremost, or was, he's since passed on, the foremost philosopher and a student of early religious rituals. This book, fascinating. And he points out in this book how deeply and profoundly religious and spiritual the practice of alchemy was. In fact, it was the reason, the spiritual dimensions of this, that you would find Isaac Newton in his laboratory by daytime trying to unravel the theories and mathematics of gravity, and in his private study in the evenings involved in alchemical pursuits. The point of alchemy was this: you try to take the base material and change it to the precious. Lead to gold, if you would. The idea being that if you could unlock the secrets of changing the base metal to the precious, you would unlock the secret of changing man's base nature into the divine. That's what they were after. How to make man God. And so, as I said, you see Isaac Newton in his laboratory doing one thing, you see him in his private study doing another, because of the spiritual nature of what this was all about. Well, in this book, the main person responsible for these kinds of pursuits and the changing of the metals was the village smith. The smithy, in fact, was the center of the village, where the fire was kept. And in his book, Mr. Eliade goes through an entire section of what divine smiths and seers are all about. Now, to us as Latter-day Saints, this is kind of very fascinating. Here's what he said. The tools of the smith are of a sacred quality. A smith's vocation is something handed down from father to son. Smith implies the possession of initiatory secrets. The smith appears in ceremonial spectacles. That's interesting to us, isn't it? The heavenly smith is the son, the messenger, or collaborator of the supreme God. The smith completes creation, organizes the world, lays the foundation of culture, and guides the human beings towards the knowledge of the mysteries. Okay. By the way, the original meaning of the word mysteries is ordinances. Mystery in the singular is the place, and the mysteries are what you do in the place. The smith is the keeper of those. The purpose of the smith is the procuring of the philosopher's stone. The smith's house is venerated as a place of worship. People foregather at the smithy for prayer. And then, probably the most important one, smith is synonymous with seer. So to say Joseph Smith is to say what? Joseph the seer. To say Joseph the seer is to say what? Joseph Smith. This is not a new idea. Okay? This is a book by Thomas Cahill called How the Irish Saved Civilization. He actually has, 6 or 7 of these books, which are called the Hinges of History, where he's picked these watershed moments that have been so critical in the development of human civilization. His book's called To the Everlasting Hills, is the notion of the Hebrew people introducing monotheism into a polytheistic world. Very interesting. One's on the life of Jesus and the introduction of Christianity. He has one on the Renaissance. Great. This one is how the Irish saved civilization, where at the beginning of the quote-unquote Dark Ages, as the hordes rode upon civilization and burned the libraries to the ground, these Irish monks went out and collected all of these manuscripts of all of these books that were threatened to be destroyed, gathered them to the abbeys off the Irish coast, copied them, and then after the Dark Ages were over, and this is what actually begins the Renaissance, these Irish monks take these manuscripts and these books and reconstitute the great libraries of the earth. Oh, what a great book. But in this book, he also says the same thing. Talking of the graves that exist in Ireland, these massive tumuli, these graves, telling a story we can now only speculate on, had long provided Irish smiths with their artistic inspiration. For in the sweeping lines of the Boyne's intriguing carvings, we can discern the ultimate sources of the magnificent metal jewelry and other objects that were being made at the outset of the patrician period by smiths who in Irish society had the status of seers. Now, this is not something novel. This is something that is very, very, very well known. Well, go back to our other slide. Okay? Because when I read this in Eliada's book, I pretty much fell on the floor. Okay? Certainly not a Latter-day Saint. We saw him smoking his pipe in the picture. Okay? Here we have Joseph, the Pharaoh changing Joseph's name to Zapanath-Paneah, which we know, okay, he who reveals that which is hidden, or Joseph the seer, which is synonymous with Smith. And Eliada in his book says what? All right, here it comes. Joseph of old was known as Zapanath-Paneah, or Joseph the seer, and could as well have been called Joseph Smith. And he shall be like unto me. Yes. Now, are you starting to get a sense here? Look, what's the significance of this stone? Here's a list you should be beginning to have. The stone places Joseph in the Old Testament pattern of prophet making from the beginning. An awareness and creation of this stone was 73 years before the birth of Christ. It was found by revelation. It was through the stone that Joseph and Moroni communicated. And as Lucy said, by which the angel showed him many things in vision. Without the stone, Joseph could not have found, by his own admission, the plates in the hill. It was the means of protecting the plates and Joseph. It was the means of translating the Book of Mormon. Now, I want you to look at this. These are the writing's kind of small here, I know. But Elder Maxwell, in his 1997 article in the Ensign, identified the 12 eyewitnesses of the translation process. Okay? I haven't put all 12 here because of space, but I've put a few here so you can get a feel for what these eyewitness accounts of the translation of the Book of Mormon is. Martin Harris. The prophet possessed a seer stone by which he was enabled to translate as well as from the Urim and Thummim, and for convenience, he used the seer stone. By aid of the seer stone, sentences would appear and read by the prophet and written by Martin, and when finished, he would say written, and if correctly written, that sentence would disappear and another appear in its place. But if not written correctly, it remained until corrected, so that the translation was just as it was engraven upon the plates, precisely in the language then used. Emma. In writing for your father, I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him. He sitting with his face buried in his hat, with a stone in it, and dictating hour after hour with nothing between us. The plates often lay on the table without any attempt at concealment, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth which I had given him to fold them in. Oliver Cowdery. I have sometimes had seasons of skepticism in which I did seriously wonder whether the prophet and I were men in our sober senses, when he would be translating from the plates, and the plates not in sight at all. Elizabeth Ann Whitmer. I cheerfully certified that I was familiar with the manner of Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon. He translated the most of it at my father's house. I often sat by and saw and heard them translate and write for hours together. Joseph never had a curtain drawn between him and his scribe while he was translating. He would place the director in his hat and then place his face in his hat so as not to exclude the light. Why don't they need a curtain? Plates aren't there. They're wrapped in a cloth. They're hidden in the woods. Isaac Hale, Emma's father. The manner in which he, Joseph, pretended to read and interpret was the same as when he looked for the money diggers, with a stone in his hat and his hat over his face, while the Book of Plates were at the same time hid in the woods. Michael Morse, Emma's brother-in-law. When Joseph was translating the Book of Mormon, I had occasion more than once to go into his immediate presence and saw him engaged at his work of translation. The mode of procedure consisted of Joseph's placing the seer stone in the crown of a hat, then putting his face into the hat so as to entirely cover his face, resting his elbows upon his knees, and then dictating word after word, while the scribe, Emma, John Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, or some other, wrote it down. David Whitmer. By fervent prayer and by otherwise humbling himself, the prophet, however, again found favor and was presented with a strange oval-shaped chocolate-colored stone about the size of an egg, only more flat, which was promised should serve the same purpose as the missing Urim and Thummim. With this stone, all the present Book of Mormon was translated. What we know is the only part of the Book of Mormon that was translated with the official Urim and Thummim were the 116 pages that were lost. Everything else, for convenience sake, was translated by the seer stone. Okay? And Joseph used this stone in some of his inspired translation of the Bible, the Joseph Smith translation. Here's a very fascinating quote. This was spoken by Joseph in the home of Benjamin Brown in 1832. After I got through translating the Book of Mormon, I took up the Bible to read it with the stone. I read the first chapter of Genesis. What's there? And I saw the things as they were done. Whoa. I turned over the next page and the next. The whole passed before me like a grand panorama. And so on, chapter after chapter, until I read the whole of it. I saw it all. Now, I would just pose the question, okay, when we go back to something like this, how important is this seer stone in the restoration of the church? And we as Latter-day Saints, we need to come to terms with this. Okay? And we need to understand. And we need to realize that it's so important that without it, we would have serious questions about Joseph's prophetic calling. With it, his whole life, his whole labor, everything that people said about him, everything falls into place and begins to make sense. All right. Now, I told you, this is an interesting one. I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but you know what Fox's Book of Martyrs is? Okay. Next to the Bible, the greatest book ever written in the religious world. It's a history of the apostles and all of the Protestant saints that were, martyred, put to death. Accounts of all the deaths of the apostles are in there. It's really quite an amazing thing. We knew Joseph wasn't a ready reader. He was at the home of Edward Stevenson, and he saw this book. He said, "What is it?" And Edward tried to explain it to him, and so Joseph said, "Can I borrow it for a while?" And he did. And when they get back to Missouri, he brings the book back to Edward Stevenson, and Stevenson said he did return it at Far West Missouri, marking as he did so, "I have seen those martyrs by the aid of the stone. God has salvation for them. His words of sympathy increase my love, which was already strong." So not just the Bible, but even this book of Martyrs, Joseph used the stone. Well, be careful about some of this, as I said, because you're in danger by dismissal of cutting yourself off from some of the greatest blessings that Heavenly Father has in store for us. Here is Brigham Young. 27th of December, 1841. "I met with the 12 at Brother Joseph's. He conversed with us in a familiar manner on a variety of subjects and explained to us the Urim and Thummim, which he had found with the plates, called in the Book of Mormon the Interpreters. He said that every man, woman also, who lived on the earth was entitled to a seer stone and should have one, but they are kept from them in consequence of their unbelief and wickedness. He showed us his seer stone." Now, that's a very interesting statement. Okay? Indicating that this gift is far more widespread than we might suppose or intended to be. The blood of Ephraim is the lineage of the seers. That is their gift. It's what their lineage is for. How sad it would be to have blessings available to us, opportunities that because of dismissal and unbelief, we automatically cut ourselves off from gifts that we should have. Brigham went on to say, "There are thousands in the world who are natural-born seers." That would be the blood of Ephraim. But when the Lord selected Joseph Smith to be his vice-regent and mouthpiece upon the earth in this dispensation, he saw that he would be faithful in honoring his calling. Or in other words, the Lord could trust him. Maybe others he could not, then and now. I mentioned that there's this cross-pollination of words like stone and Urim and Thummim, and that there was scriptural precedent for it. Let's pay attention to this. This is section 130 of the Doctrine and Covenants. "The angels do not reside on a planet like this earth, but they reside in the presence of God on a globe like a sea of glass and fire, where all things for their glory are manifest, past, present, and future, and are continually before the Lord. The place where God dwells is a great Urim and Thummim." Or we might say, what? Stone. "This earth in its sanctified and immortal state will be made like unto crystal and will be a Urim and Thummim to the inhabitants who dwell thereon, whereby all things pertaining to an inferior kingdom this earth in its sanctified and immortal state will be made like unto crystal, and will be a urim and thummim. See how the word's used? To the inhabitants who dwell thereon, whereby all things pertaining to an inferior kingdom or all things of a lower order will be manifested to those who dwell on it, and this earth will be Christ's. And then this famous, familiar part. Then the white stone, mentioned in Revelation 2, verse 17, will become a Urim and Thummim to each individual who receives one, where things pertaining to a higher order of kingdoms will be made known. And a white stone is given to each of those who come into the celestial kingdom, whereon is a new name written, which no man knoweth save he that receiveth it. The new name is the key word. Now look, your great reward to enter exaltation is to be presented with what? A seer stone, where all things pertaining to the higher order of the kingdoms will be made manifest. The earth that you will dwell on, this earth in its glorified, exalted state, will be just like that, only to reveal things of inferior kingdoms. But the stone, okay, that's your reward. We need to be careful how we think about this. And it may be that this stone is not something new to us. It may be that this is something that we have long been familiar with. I told you W.W. Phelps knew a lot of things. Listen to this. This is a poem he wrote called My Old White Stone. My old white stone. Oh, keep my old white stone, Father. Oh, keep it till I come. The stone I had of thee at home before the world was known. For lo, in it is my new name, the name thou gavest me, when I was washed and set apart for the glory yet to be. Eternity is thine, Father, age after age has gone, and yet among thy sons as one, my spirit moves divine, with light and life and sense and love, through realms where wisdom's known, to find by faith my path back home to my gem, my old white stone. The sweetest joy that seems, Father, is now and then a view of that eternal world and you that flashes through my dreams in some blessed spot that's still and pure, where virtue's bliss is known and where my spirit eyes can see for themselves my old white stone. Okay, now can you see how there's something here that's much more profound and deep, okay, than we ever might have before supposed? In the Bonneville Ward is a good brother, one of my friends, Kelly Patterson, who's a professor down at BYU. He gave a devotional talk down there, a forum one day, and he wasn't necessarily talking about these things, but he made two very interesting statements that I think are relevant for our class today. One was, scrutinize carefully the assumptions of those who only make the worst representations about your faith. Okay? And the other one was, be careful about the assumptions you make about your own faith. And when you do make assumptions, okay, make sure they are well considered. All right. I hesitate to say this. Any questions or comments? Yes, John.
Going back to your first slide where you said that you need to add the date 1822, how is that date being incorporated into church history and teachings in our world today?
Yeah, all you have to do is look at the new position papers on LDS.org and see how that's coming in. In my last years, before I retired, I was asked to do a total curriculum review of all of church education materials, looking for those areas. Remember, I told you the buzzword is inoculation. Looking for those areas that we've not done well in, that need to be updated, where we've got things in there that are wrong, to try to bring our curriculum manuals, at least in church education, up to the standard. And I know Seminary Institute personnel are going through extensive training on how to do some things in their in-service meetings in the summertime. In the church manuals, these things are coming in regularly. It takes a while. Ensign Magazine, okay, all of these things are like a grand crescendo as these things are coming together and being placed before us. We need to be diligent enough that we're aware of what's happening, okay, and on top of the material as it comes forth. Okay, but there is an ongoing process. So I've been retired for 6 years now, okay, and so my curriculum review was 2 years before I retired, so that's 8 years where these things have slowly been being incorporated and coming to the fore. The Joseph Smith papers, of course. Okay, you don't have to be like me and buy all the hard copies of this and spend $1,000, to try to get them. But they're all online. And I know, as far as writing curriculum, and in my work with Deseret Book, as we've been producing the material that we've been producing for them, they don't even like us to quote out of the history of the church. Okay, what they want us quoting out of and what Correlation wanted us quoting out of were the Joseph Smith papers. And so there's your key right there. Okay, any other comments or questions? Yes, please, George.
Some time back, I read where Joseph Smith used the seer stone in his work, but after a time, he didn't need to use it. Is that true?
Well, there are a number of stones in the earliest history of the church. We have at least 3 that I know of that Joseph used. I know while he's in Nauvoo, someone brings to him what are called the Rushton stones. This is an interesting comment. And present them to Joseph. These were people from England. They present them to Joseph, and Joseph looks at them and says, 2 of the very best I've seen. I pronounce them Urim and Thummim. Okay, and I think Joseph himself. Sometimes we say that because we want to see Joseph moving away from these things a little bit, but he never really did. But I also think that Joseph used the stone as an instrument early, but later on in his life, he reached a point where his entire body became an instrument of seership. And it was so natural for him and so convenient that, he seems to have just resonated seership from within himself. I want to show you one more picture because I think this is interesting, and we'll let it go. Those of you who have been to Palmyra recognize this as the frame house, newly restored from the older contemporary version that was there before. Joseph and his family lived in this farmhouse, and there used to be the road used to run right through the middle of the property, but they've transferred it up behind the Smith family farm now. If you look behind the house, the road will be back there, but then there's a line of trees back there behind the home, back there in the left hand about the middle. That's the boundary line between the Smith farm and the Chase farm. Okay, so the Smith farm is down here where we're standing, where we took this picture. If you went behind this house and across the road to those trees, you would enter into the Chase property. It is on that property that the seer stone was discovered. I don't know what's up there today. Okay? I just think there might be some things involved here regarding the sacredness of ground and holy places, that when all of this material kind of comes forward and we see it all, not through, as Paul said, the glass darkly, but the veil is removed and understanding comes, we're going to see some things and just go, wow. Okay, now I don't know where on that property that seer stone was found. Wouldn't surprise me. Okay?
Inasmuch as the stone came from the Chase's property and Joseph Smith borrowed it, was there any further concern about the family wanting that stone back?
Oh,
Descendants in 2015.
yeah, well, I think by now that it's kind of died away, but certainly at the time of Joseph Smith, that was a major problem of contention between the two families. And it was the Chase family mostly leading the attempts to take the plates from Joseph. And part of that reason was them feeling they had a vested interest in those plates because of that stone being found on their property. I don't think today that that's an issue, but certainly at the time of Joseph, while they were in Palmyra, that was an incredibly important thing. Well, brothers and sisters, we're finished. Let me just say this. I want to bear you my testimony, particularly about these things, that I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet and exactly who he said he was. I have a testimony of Joseph as prophet and seer. I am rejoicing in the ability to connect the life of the prophet Joseph to the prophets of old, anciently in the scriptures. And I think that there's nothing more delightful than discovering these things about the prophet Joseph Smith and having them not only answer our questions, but to strengthen us, to fortify us, to build our faith in not only Joseph, but the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ upon this earth in the latter days. And I bear you my witness that those things are undeniably true. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.